Well, I think if you look at what has happened last year in 2022, I think it's quite crucial to start diversifying a little bit your portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the performances when you look at the performance from the previous year, pretty much major indices actually went down, while a couple of alternative investments actually, like opportunities, went up instead.
On this episode of Early Bird, Dmytro Lokshin, CEO and co-founder of Investables. Dmytro joins the podcast today to talk about alternative investing in 2023, including the advantages, disadvantages, and the state of alternatives this year. If you're an investor looking to stay on top of the latest market trends, then you're listening to the right podcast. This is Early Bird, and I'm your host, Stephen Lerner. Before we get to today's discussion, let me tell you how you can save time and beat the market through Early Bird, a free daily email newsletter featuring commentary about the latest trends in stocks, cryptocurrency, and equity crowdfunding. Early Bird is designed to help individual and non-professional investors stay on top of all of the critical investing trends. The newsletter is 100% free and is sent to your email box each weekday morning. Subscribe to Early Bird for free at www.earlybird.email. Once again, that's earlybird.email. And now, today's discussion. All right, Dmytro, welcome to the Early Bird podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Stephen, for hosting me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. We're talking about alternative investing in 2023. What does that mean? Before we do that, Dmytro, in about 30 seconds or so, what should the audience know about your background? What did you do, and what are you working on? About 30 seconds.
Sure. So I have a finance background. So I've been studying finance for quite a bit, and for the past 7 years, I would say I've been an entrepreneur, starting multiple different businesses in different niches, whether retail, software development, many other SaaS businesses, and my recent company is Investables, an alternative investment platform for physical assets.
Got it. And it's really cool, especially it's you're growing in that alternative investing space. And that's kind of the subject of today. It's alternative investing in 2023. Dmytro, how would you define alternative investing?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So I think it's pretty much everything that you can't freely trade on the Nasdaq or NYSE, and it's not covering bonds as well. So neither publicly available stocks nor bonds, I would say.
Yeah, pretty wide net. Why do you think retail investors, normal average people, should consider investing in alternatives?
Well, I think if you look at what has happened last year in 2022, I think it's quite crucial to start diversifying a little bit your portfolio. So when you look at the performances when you look at the performance from the previous year, pretty much major indices actually went down, while a couple of alternative investments actually, like opportunities, went up instead.
What went up last year?
I'm sorry?
You said a few went up, a few alternative.
Yeah.
What exactly went up?
Well, so I think art performed quite well last year, as well as wine was really, really interesting as an investment, as well as gems, many different luxury items like Hermes bags, for instance, and other items, and a couple of other items.
True. Some physical items went up last year. I know some items also went down. Most items, as you know, depreciate in value over time. In terms of other alternatives, though, it was kind of a mixed bag. I felt. I would love to hear what you think. I've do some real estate platform investing. Those did pretty well compared to the market last year, but as everybody knows, cryptocurrencies had a terrible year last year. So what do you make of that? It seems like a pretty mixed bag when it comes to alternatives.
Yes, I think you have to kind of a little bit differentiate. So when we look at especially 2021 and this NFT craze, it kind of, to be honest, I was a little bit worried Simply because people started like rather instead of investing, I would just call it speculating, and I think investing and speculating are two different things. If you're investing into something that is like very difficult, that doesn't really have like a really strong physical value, then I think it just becomes a gamble to some degree, and this is like ultimately what's happened as well. With NFTs and cryptocurrencies over the past year. Whereas if you're looking, let's say, at real estate, I think real estate is a really good example. I think it obviously depends a lot on the macroeconomics and the stimuli that are coming from the governments. But I think real estate is definitely an interesting option, as well as like more physical assets, because they have a certain physical value that you can lean upon.
Absolutely, yeah. There are a lot of benefits to real estate, and obviously there are so many new platforms today that cater to getting average investors involved in real estate investing, as well as publicly traded real estate investment trusts that are also an option as well. Going back to alternatives, though, what are the benefits of investing in alternatives?
Well, I think there are a couple of. So first of all, it's the low correlation that you get, as compared to the stock market. So if you're looking to diversify your portfolios, I think number one that you have to look at initially is like the correlation. If it's if your stock is going down, will this asset go down as well or not? I think this is very important, because if the asset is going down, you're not really diversifying. You're just you're stuck pretty much in the same place. Number two, I think like certain physical assets definitely provide value, and after what we've seen, I think many people are trying to go back to to the actual book value, because company values are also going down. So I think value investing is actually getting trendy again.
Oh yeah.
And if you're looking at physical assets, I think they can definitely provide a really strong book value, if to say so.
Well, you're right. The book value is huge. You can really get strong appreciation over time, and it allows you to diversify and your portfolio to hedge against the stock market, which, as we all saw from 2022, can be pretty bad at times. Although generally, the stock market over many years does very well. I'm curious. What are the negatives of alternative investing? It's certainly great for a portfolio to invest in some alternatives, but there's a downside as well, right?
Oh, there are obviously. I think not every alternative offers you like an income, like a passive income, like dividends, right? So if you invest in a classic car, for instance, maybe it's actually the other way around. You actually have to pay money in order to maintain it, pay for storage, pay for insurance. Whereas if you invest in a stock that gives you a decent dividend, it's pretty much a passive income. I think this is a downside. You might have also issues to sell out the asset, so like to actually sell it in the secondary market. I think the liquidity is definitely lower as opposed to say blue chip stocks like Apple, Tesla, and Amazon.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Liquidity is certainly an issue when you're dealing with alternatives. Some alternatives are not as liquid as you might get with a traditional investment. So how would an investor deal with a portfolio where you have alternatives but they're not liquid? What advice do you have for those investors?
Yeah, I think this is kind of an issue that we're trying to solve. So I think one of the reasons why fractional investments are becoming so trendy is because there are many people pulling their money together, and then you pretty much create a secondary market across those fractional shareholders. So I think that this is why a couple of also real estate platforms are pretty much bonding investors together. So they are creating liquidity per se because multiple parties are coming together to invest.
Good point. When we return, we'll hear from Dimitro about his favorite physical items to invest in and how to get started with alternative investing. But first, let me tell you how you can become a more informed investor through Early Bird, a free daily email newsletter. Early Bird has commentary on the latest events and trends in stocks, cryptocurrency, and crowdfunding. With Early Bird's daily weekday email, investors can quickly stay on top of the trends and beat the market. Subscribe to Early Bird for free at www.earlybird.email. Once again, that's earlybird.email. And now, back to today's discussion. So, Dimitro, today we're talking about alternative investing in 2023. I'm curious from your perspective. Obviously, you have a company that's involved in investing in alternatives, but why do you think in the past few years alternative investing has become so popular with average, everyday investors?
That's a good question. I think first, people had more money to spend, and I think partially it's been fueled a little bit also by this whole like crypto craze. So people had actually money to invest in other things. Secondly, alternatives in general have been, they have been reserved to high net worth individuals, and as we know, those people didn't really lose that much money. So the main market to serve those people still actually existed. That's the second reason. The third reason is I think people to some degree are actually also getting a little bit more sophisticated because they're starting to understand that I think in order to make money, rule number one is not to lose money. So you have to be cautious about where to invest. So people are actually starting to diversify. And last but not least, I also think that people are just kind of curious to explore other things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's just the nature of people. To give you an idea of the growth, you already know this, but just for our listeners' sake, data provider Preqin found that the alternative investment industry is expected to grow by 59% by this year, 2023, and will reach $14 trillion in assets in 5 years' time. It's certainly growing. In 2023, especially a year after what we experienced with the stock market going down, Dimitro, why is this a good time to get into alternatives?
I think because, so reason number one, I think they're getting more and more platforms actually showing up and allowing people to invest in those kind of assets that were previously pretty much just not available. Number two, I think also, and as you said initially, some of the alternative assets went actually down as well. So I think it's just a good time to get into the market, just as with the stock market as well. And the reason number three is just because, at least what I think is like, the sooner you start understanding those alternative markets, the faster you'll be able to just, gain profit.
You're right. It could be a good engine for driving profit. We're not financial advisors. I always tell listeners to the podcast and readers to the newsletter, speak to financial advisors regarding how to invest. But in terms of a portfolio for investment, we're talking about a small percentage typically that goes into alternatives, right? For most people.
Yep, no, that's true. So usually it's somewhere in, I think with big accounts, it's maybe, a couple of percent, but, like I would say like 8 digits and above, it's maybe like a couple of percent. But then if you're looking at smaller accounts, usually like up to 10%. I think this is a healthy ratio.
Yeah, I think it really is all going to depend on the person. Don't invest in alternatives what you're prepared to lose is kind of what I always say. But you're right; it's certainly a good hedge. in a portfolio. You wouldn't want to invest your retirement savings in an alternative, right, Dimitro?
Oh, well, you would say so, but there are companies offering it.
I
So
noticed
except
that.
there
Yes.
are they're offering
Is
it.
is that a wise idea? Would you recommend that for everyday investors to put their retirement savings into an alternative?
It depends. It depends if you trust your average custodian or not.
Mm-hmm. No, you're
So
right.
it depends. Like if you're proficient in, I mean, if you're sufficient, if you're proficient enough, if you know how it's done, I think maybe it's better if you manage it on your own. If you don't know how it's done, I'm not sure whether you should really go into like very risky investments.
Of course.
I wouldn't put my money into cryptocurrency if I would be in my 50s.
Not the wisest idea at that age. You're right. So Dimitro, what advice would you have for investors who are new to alternatives, never done it before, want to get started? A lot of investors have tried it already, but not everybody. So, what advice would you give to those investors who are interested in either starting with alternatives or branching out to other types of alternatives?
Yeah, I think I think what you need to do in the very first place is like to select maybe one or two, maximum three categories you would like to focus on,
Mm.
because each market has its perks and disadvantages. So whether it's real estate, whether you want to do private securities into pre-IPO companies, whether you want to invest in art, watches, whatever. I think you need to figure out maybe one or two directions you would like to go, and then as the next step, you really need to start getting familiar with this different categories. So you need to start like reading. You have to. I think you either have to start getting an understanding, or you need to find a provider who can manage it for you in a very professional way. But I would start with like small sums initially, and then maybe potentially like going up in the investment size.
Absolutely. And the other thing I say with alternatives personally is just, especially with crypto, but this goes to any alternatives, just make sure, watch out for scams. A lot of scams out there. Make sure you're dealing with reputable providers, especially if you're using a third party service. And be prepared to hold on to that alternative for some time. So, it's not an overnight success usually, an alternative, right?
No, it's not. I mean, I think it's obviously, there is a saying, buy low, sell high, but pretty much every person misses it.
You're right. It's most people miss it, but here it's you're buying low but selling high. Hopefully, many years down the line, because it takes a while for these alternative investments to really grow. It sounds like.
Yeah, no, definitely. For physical assets, it's a slightly longer investment horizon.
Mhm.
For cryptocurrencies, I would be super careful. If you don't really know what's happening inside the company,
Mhm.
just don't invest.
So, Dimitro, want to know what are your favorite physical items to invest in for 2023?
That's a very interesting question. So, I personally would definitely recommend wine, watches, and art. I think those three assets have proven quite well over the last couple of years. The watches maybe went down a little bit last year, but I think it's quite an interesting entry point this year to kind of actually get in and then wait until it starts appreciating. Whereas wine is just going up, and up champagne as well. There is just much more. There was just much more demand than supply. Also, given also because the whole war's kind of going back to the standard mode.
Mm.
Like everyone's kind of getting a little bit easy on Corona, so people are starting to just consume more wine. So it's gonna go up
You're right
this year.
about that. Definitely look at those macro trends before investing in
Yeah,
alternatives.
yeah.
Um,
No, macro is key. So macro is definitely key. Like for anything.
Any investment, you're right. Absolutely. Demetrio, thank you so much for coming on the Early Bird podcast. Thank you so much for talking about alternative investing in 2023. Before we wrap up our podcast, I just have one final question. And it's the most important question for today's discussion. That question for you, Dimitro, is if you were to enter a photography contest, what would you take pictures of?
Mountains.
Mountains? Why mountains?
I think it's it's an interesting question. I think they're very calm but very strong, and they I think they're calm but very strong, and you kind of sense them a little bit, especially if it's like if it's on the countryside and no cities around. I like to be in the nature, so I think mountains are great.
Thank you again to Dimitro Lakshin for sharing your insights on alternative investing. And thank you to everyone for listening to today's discussion. We'll be back next week for another episode of Early Bird. Have a great day.